The storm took the ship on the night of my brother's wedding, and it took my name along with it, though no one knew that yet. I was 17 when they pulled bodies from the wreck at Black Rock Point and laid them out on the shingle beach for the families to claim, and I was 17 when a fisherman's wife looked at a drowned boy with dark hair and told the magistrate it was Reese Calden, youngest son of Ferndale House, lost with all hands aboard the Nerissa. She was wrong, but no one questioned a grieving woman's certainty, least of all my own brother, who stood on that beach with his hat pressed to his chest and wept for a boy who was not me, and who I have often wondered in the 15 years since whether he wept with relief. My name is Reese Calden. I did not drown that night. I swam. I will tell you why I let them believe otherwise, though the telling is not simple, because the truth of that night has as many currents in it as the sea that nearly killed me. Ferndale House sat above the cliffs where our family had kept sheep and buried its dead for 6 generations, and I was to inherit it, being the elder son by 11 months, a fact my brother Caspian had resented since before either of us understood what the word inheritance meant. We were close as children in the way that boys raised alone on a windswept headland are often close, out of necessity more than tenderness. And I loved him the way one loves a brother even while suspecting, in some unexamined corner of the heart, that he would not weep long if the wind ever carried you away. The wind carried me away 3 days before I was to marry Eloan Trask, the shipwright's daughter, a woman my father considered beneath our name and Caspian considered, though he never once said it aloud, a prize he would have liked for himself. I boarded the Nerissa that night, not as a passenger, but as a fool, having drunk too much at my own betrothal dinner and wandered down to the harbor to clear my head, where Caspian found me on the deck of our father's fishing vessel, moored beside the merchant ship, both of us arguing about money, about Ferndale, about a debt he had run up against my future inheritance without my knowledge or my father's. I remember his hand on my shoulder. I remember the deck pitching beneath a wave that should not have reached so far into the harbor. I remember going into black water that felt, for one endless moment, warmer than the argument we had just been having. What I do not remember clearly, even now, is whether Caspian pushed me or whether the sea simply took what storms take. I have turned that moment over so many times in 15 years that I no longer trust my own memory of it. And that uncertainty, more than grief, more than anger, is the wound that never fully closed. I swam 3 miles down the coast in water cold enough to stop a man's heart, and I came ashore half drowned on the beach below Goro Farm, where a widow named Agnes Penhale found me at dawn, wrapped me in her dead husband's coat, and asked no questions I was not ready to answer. I stayed with her through the winter, and by spring, when word reached even that remote farm that Reese Calden had drowned and been buried in the Ferndale plot beside his mother, I had already made a decision that has shaped every year since. I did not correct them. I told myself that first year it was because I needed time to understand what had truly happened on that deck before I accused my own brother of murder. I told myself the second year it was because Eloan had already begun, by then, to be courted gently by Caspian himself, and I could not bear to walk back into her life only to tear it open again with an accusation I could not prove. By the 5th year, I had built another life under another name in Falmouth, a life with ships and cargo and a reputation for shrewd, quiet dealing, and the longer I lived as Mr. Corn Ray, merchant, the harder it became to remember how to be Reese Calden at all. Then, this spring, a letter reached me in Falmouth Harbor, forwarded through 3 hands before it found me, informing Mr. Ray that Ferndale House and its land were to be sold, the family having fallen deeply into debt, and inviting any interested party to view the estate before auction. I went, telling myself it was only curiosity, the way a man tells himself many things before the truth catches up with him on a road he has walked before. I did not expect to arrive on the very day Caspian Calvin married Aloan Trask a second time, having lost her once to widowhood 3 years prior in circumstances the invitation letter described only as a tragic accident at sea, and was now, apparently, remarrying her in a ceremony meant as much to restore Ferndale's fortunes as to restore what remained of his heart. I stood at the back of the chapel in a stranger's good coat, and when Aloan turned from the altar and her eyes swept the gathered guests the way a bride's eyes always do, searching without quite knowing what they search for, they found mine, and I watched 15 years fall out of her face all at once. She did not scream. She did not faint, as I believe a lesser woman, or a woman in a lesser story, might have done. She went very pale and very still, and she said, quietly enough that only the front pews heard her, Reese and the whole chapel turned to look at a dead man standing in the doorway with the sea light behind him. Caspian's face, when he turned, told me more in that single instant than 15 years of uncertainty had managed to tell me. It was not the face of a man seeing a beloved brother restored from the grave. It was the face of a man watching a debt finally come due. I did not stay for the scene that followed, the shouting, the magistrate sent for, the solicitor summoned within the week to determine whether a man legally buried could legally still own the house being sold out from under him. I retreated to the Falmouth rooms I still kept and let the county do what counties do best, which is talk, and through that talk, slowly, other truths began working their way to the surface like wreckage finally released by a current. It was Agnes Penhale, the widow who had saved my life once already, who came to find me a fortnight later with something wrapped in oiled cloth, a ship's logbook she had kept hidden in her cottage for 15 years, salvaged from the Nerissa's wreckage and washed up not far from where she had found me, though she had never told me of it, not wanting, she said, to burden a half-drowned boy with more than the sea had already given him. The logbook belonged to the Nerissa's first mate, a man who had also drowned that night, and in it, in a hand grown increasingly unsteady across its final pages, he had recorded that the merchant ship's captain had taken on a private cargo at Caspian Calden's arrangement 2 days before departure, an unlisted cargo of smuggled brandy that violated the harbor's customs bond, and that Caspian himself had come aboard that final night, not merely to argue with his brother, but to remove evidence of the arrangement before the customs inspectors could search the hold at first light. The storm had not sunk the Nerissa by accident. The first mate's final entry, written in a hand that suggests he knew he would not live to deliver it, recorded that Caspian had ordered the ballast shifted to conceal the illegal cargo from a boarding inspection expected at dawn, an alteration that made the ship dangerously unstable in exactly the kind of sudden coastal squall that struck that night. A risk Caspian had been warned of and had dismissed in his hurry to protect himself from ruin. My brother had not pushed me into the sea in a moment of fury, as I had spent 15 years fearing and half believing. He had, in his panic over discovery and debt, made a decision about ballast and cargo that killed an entire crew and very nearly killed me. And rather than confess that recklessness, he had allowed the county to believe I drowned in an act of God, a story so much simpler and so much kinder to his own name than the truth. I understood then why he had wept so convincingly on the beach that morning. Grief and guilt, I have since learned, can look remarkably alike from a distance. I confronted him not in anger, though anger was certainly present, but with the logbook itself, laid open on the desk of the Ferndale study, where our father had once taught us both to read, in front of Aloan, who had every right to hear it, and in front of the solicitor already engaged to settle the sale of the house neither of us, by rights, should have been arguing over. Caspian did not deny it. I think, in truth, he had been waiting 15 years for someone to finally ask him to stop denying it. I never meant for the ship to founder, he said, his voice smaller than I had ever heard it, smaller than the voice of the boy who used to dare me to jump from the harbor wall. I meant only to save the cargo. I did not know the ballast would matter so much in a storm. I have told myself that every night since, Reese, that I did not know, and some nights I nearly believe it. And the story of my drowning, I said, did you not know that would matter either? I let them bury a stranger under your name because it was easier than admitting what I had done, he said, and for the first time in 15 years, I heard something in his voice that was not performance. And then, God forgive me, I found it easier still to inherit Ferndale believing you were gone, because grief, Reese, grief asks nothing of a man that guilt does not also demand, and grief is so much lighter to carry. Deloan did not speak for a long while after that. When she finally did, she looked not at Caspian, but at me, and asked the only question that mattered to her in that room, full of solicitors and shipwrecked truths. Did you know, she said, all these years that I still lit a candle for you every Nerissa anniversary, believing you dead, while you lived 3 days right away under another man's name? I had no honest answer that would not wound her further. So I gave her the only honest thing I had left, which was silence, and she read in that silence everything I could not say aloud. That I had let her grieve a dead man for 15 years, partly out of cowardice, and partly, though I had never let myself examine it too closely, because some bitter, wounded part of me had wanted her to grieve, had wanted someone in that house to feel even a fraction of what the sea had cost me. There is no clean ending to a story like this one, and I will not give you a false one now. Caspian did not go to the gallows. The magistrate, upon reviewing 15-year-old evidence and a dead first mate's waterlogged handwriting, ruled the matter one of reckless endangerment long since beyond the reach of formal prosecution, though the ruling did nothing to restore what the county now understood about the Calvin name, and Caspian left Ferndale within the month for a smaller property inland, where I understand he lives now in a quiet that I suspect he finds far heavier than any prison sentence. I took Ferndale House at last, under my true name, 15 years, and one drowned stranger too late to feel much like victory. Eloan did not marry either of us again. She took a cottage near the harbor with the small inheritance her first husband had left her, and for a long while she would not see me at all, and when she finally did, one autumn evening on the harbor wall where Caspian and I had once dared each other to jump, she told me she did not know yet whether she could forgive a man for letting her mourn him falsely for 15 years, only that she was tired, finally, of mourning anyone, living or dead, and would rather spend whatever years remained finding out who I had actually become in the man's clothes I had been wearing when I walked back into her wedding. I do not know yet how that story ends either. Some tides, I have learned, take longer to turn than others. But I no longer stand on the harbor wall wondering whether my own brother pushed me into that black water out of hatred. I know now it was something smaller and sadder than hatred, a frightened man protecting a secret not worth the price it finally cost him. And somehow that knowledge, plain and unglamorous as it is, has let me sleep through the sound of storms for the first time in 15 years. The sea gave me back my life that night, though it took 15 years for it to give me back my name as well. I have stopped asking it for anything more than that.